Welcome to Sisters in Crime Australia and Murder Monday, when authors talk about their crime craft. I'm Karina Kilmore, a crime writer, a journalist, and a member of Sisters in Crime, and we've been celebrating women's crime writing since 1991. Before I introduce Aoife Clifford, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to all Indigenous people of Australia and their elders past and present. Aoife, welcome.
Hello, delighted to be here.
Let me introduce you. You now have 3 crime novels under your belt, but you cut your teeth on short stories. Your very first story won the Sisters in Crime Scarlet Stiletto Award in 2007, and then you became a serial offender, taking out another 6 short story awards, including the prize for the funniest story, Summer of the 17 poll, which also went on to win the SD Harvey Award in 2012. Your first novel, My First Big Book of Murder, was shortlisted for the UK Crime Writers Association debut dagger, and your second novel, Second Sight, was highly commended in Sisters in Crime's David Awards. Before we begin the questions, can you please give us the elevator pitch for your new novel, When We Fall?
Well, thanks, but there's a slight correction there that my first book of murder, which did get shortlisted for the debut dagger, was one that I didn't actually finish. So that remains unwritten. You only had to put in a couple of chapters, and that's all that got written for that one. So yeah, but
so that's an award for an unpublished manuscript, is it? Or?
Yeah, all you had to do was send in, it was a set amount of words, I think, for debut dagger.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you just had to write the first bit. And I really did write the first bit, not knowing how it'd end. And I still don't know how that one would end. And moved on to different things. Right. So, but When We Fall, I guess the elevator pitch, it depends on how long you're in the elevator for, but it really is about when good people look away, what might happen. My main character, Alex, is a barrister. She works in the city, but work is slow. She's recently divorced and life is a bit difficult. She's a bit at the crossroads of her life. And one of the crossroads is that her mother, Denny, has got recently been diagnosed with dementia. So it's at the start of the kind of dementia journey. And Alex has gone to where Denny is living now in order to try and work out how do they handle this. And they're 2 women who have been very good at keeping arm's length from each other, and that's about to change. Oh. So while they're doing it and they're avoiding dealing with their issues, they're walking along the beach and they come across a severed leg, and so starts the adventure.
Wow, sounds amazing. Right, let's get to our questions.
Excellent.
Okay, what's the hardest part about writing?
First drafts. I find first drafts very hard, mostly because I don't plot that much. And so my first draft is the elaborate finding out what the plot is. It's also hard first drafts because you're usually starting to do them at the time that the previous book has been written, and you're really polishing up and making it as perfect as you possibly can. And for me, it's then really hard to accept how messy and awful first drafts are without despairing, because you're thinking, why can't I just write like that at the start? But that's not how this all works.
Right. How do you approach representing diverse communities in your writing?
That's a great question. There's 2 parts of that to me. The thing is, the short answer would be very carefully and to try and do it respectfully. It's important for me that my books reflect the world as I see it. And so that includes diverse people in it. I heard a really interesting interview with Carol Phillips, who is an English author and he's of West Indian descent. And he was making the point that all the great kind of Jane Austen type novels and books written around that time, that they were written in a diverse world, and that world was never reflected in the novels. So those worlds were just as diverse as the UK is today, but yet they had been whitewashed out. And I mean, that's a disgrace. And so it's important that I write a world that's as diverse as, say, Melbourne is, if I'm writing Melbourne, or if I write in a country town, that it reflects accurately what the country town looks like, which would not be as diverse as Melbourne, but still would be diverse. But that said, I would be very mindful about whose eyes am I watching this world through. And I certainly would pause a lot before I chose to write in someone who was quite diverse from me, unless I really felt that I understood that world correctly. And as a reader and bookseller, I'm delighted to see that I think the more important thing is more diverse people get to write their own books, and we get to read them. And I know in the publishing industry that is certainly changing in the last, say, 3 to 4 years, and we're seeing far more diverse voices. And for me, that's where the game's at, and I really enjoy reading them.
Excellent, thank you. Why is crime such an appealing genre?
I could talk about this all day. I think it's 2 main reasons I can think of, and it's because the appeal is to 2 kind of the opposite sides of our human selves. One is we love excitement, and crime writing is exciting. It's the biggest stakes, right? It's always going to be something explosive, important. It's life and death, big issues. You can't get bigger than that. But I think it also appeals to our nature of wanting to order the world, and that at the end of the book, you will have answers, and which I think is so appealing in a world where we increasingly feel like we don't have the answer to things. And in fact, during lockdown, people turned to crime writing, to crime reading. And I can really remember, it was probably second lockdown in Melbourne, and when we couldn't allow people into the bookstore. And this one woman just stood at the glass and banged on the glass to me and just yelled out and said, "Give me a book." And I went, "What one? You know, can you point to one?" sort of thing. She went, "Just give me a thriller, any thriller." And it was like, I get you, lady. Yep, I feel the same way. I want to be totally absorbed, taken away, and know that at the end I will know the answers. I think the other thing is, and that crime does really well, actually, so I'm going to go a third thing as well, is that it invites the reader to actively participate, so that you can sit there and be the armchair detective. You can try and get there a bit earlier than the real detective in the book, or whoever the person solving the crime is. And that is super appealing. I love that myself.
Yeah. I'm with you. Does your main character...
I thought you would be.
Yeah. Does your main character ever surprise you?
Oh, all the time. If you don't plot your book out, the whole thing's a surprise from start to the end. Yeah, surprisingly a lot. You sort of think you're heading in one direction, and you end up in a totally different place. And for me, I have my rule for first drafts, and this probably is why they're messy and difficult, is I just say yes to everything. So if something surprising happens, I'll kind of follow it. It does mean that in second drafts, I will have to rewrite and re-engineer stuff to make everything fit, and I'm okay with that. So the rule for me is just say yes to any surprise that comes along, and it's always interesting. And even if you don't necessarily use it, you might learn something about your character that's useful for you as the writer, even if it isn't useful for the reader. And then all the no's come in the later drafts as you try and shape it as best you can.
I love that. Just say yes to everything. What is your writing routine?
I don't have a routine. I have a crazy life outside of writing that impinges all the time, which makes me cross. But if I could have I know when things are going well, when I can basically, I am one of those people who, if I can sit down and write at some time each day, and when I have the rule of you've got to write 1,000 words each day, and I just can mark off a few of those days in a row, that's when things start really moving for me. It's the stopping and starting, it's the doing other stuff. And then for me, then you have to go back into that headspace again. And it's not quite as productive. There's always that, that little bit of a grind to get started and then you're kind of in. Yeah, I like to keep that going for as long as possible. And life rarely lets me do that, but I try.
What's your top writing tip and what's your top self-editing tip?
Oh, okay. Look, they're almost the same thing, but I love the editing process. So I do a lot of drafts. So editing is where it's really at. That's my happy space, just to do it. So what I tell myself at both stages is just make it better. It doesn't have to be perfect. You're not aiming for perfection, especially that first draft. You are definitely not aiming for perfection, but everything is just try and make it better. So just try and keep pushing the dial in the right direction is what I do. And I think so that really applies. That's just my general mantra in life, is just make it better.
What triggers you to write about a particular storyline?
Oh, that's quite a hard question. What triggers me? I guess my starting point for things is I get a few competing ideas that are not related to each other and I push them together and I just see the chemistry of that and then it all goes from there. So it's an idea that kind of captures me and I think is interesting and probably an idea that I really feel like I don't know the answer to, or I haven't got my own answer to it. And so then writing it out in book form makes me explore that and sort of lean in. But also what I would tend to do then is, like, I'm thinking for When We Fall, I was interested in, it was a particular thing about parents and children. It was about an incident that happened in Ireland that I could then see reflected in what happened in Australia with adoptions and things like that. And it interested me that two countries were going through a similar kind of having to face the truth about something really awful. And so once I had that as a thought, I then leaned into the idea about parents and children, but I explored it from a whole range of different ideas of parenting and, absent parents, lost children. And then also that my main character is someone who is not a parent and in the book has no inclination at all to become a parent, to try and explore that whole idea from all different angles just to see what I made of it in the end.
Yeah, I love that variety of point of view.
It's fascinating because when you look at it from different angles, how different your view might change on something.
How important is place in your writing?
It's important, but probably not as important as that I know for other writers who it's crucial, like landscape becomes a character. For me, it's probably a bit more functional. I like writing about country towns, but because I'm from a country town, so I want to represent authentic country towns, hopefully, we were actually talking about this the other night at a sisters event, whereas I sort of come from the point of view that I want people to believe that my town is probably a really good place to live for all the other people who aren't involved in the murder. Like, it's sometimes I read towns where it's so dysfunctional, you go, why are people left in this town? What are they doing there? So I want to celebrate like the community of country town, but often what I'm thinking about for place is typical in crime stories is that you really do want to have a limited an enclosed environment, because then that really enhances the puzzle in that you are probably going to know who the killer is. Now, in a huge porous city like, say, Melbourne, that's a harder thing to generate. Whereas in a country town, you can make that more believable and heightened. And I love that about crime writing, when you have that kind of captured community. So for me, I'm often thinking about those things rather than thinking, oh, I really must set it in this environment. Yeah.
What research did you do for your latest novel?
It's sort of fun research. I'm someone who am a very curious person and I'm very inquisitive about other people's lives. So I know not to go start researching at the start, because I would just go down too many rabbit holes. So what I do is I tend to write, and when I run into a problem, I then go and research that specific problem so I don't get lost. That said, I mean, research, I enjoy it so much that in my second book, I kind of included a whole character doing the job of the person I talked to about it, a forensic anthropologist, just because the stuff she was telling me was so good. But When We Fall, I talked to retired police people. I talked to people about kayaking. I talked to medical people. And my top tip for sisters in crime people, if you are stuck trying to find someone who, you know, an expert in an area, go chat to Kilmore. She knows everybody and has given me quite a few tips over the years, and pulled out her little black book for me, which I'm deeply appreciative of. It was so much fun.
Fantastic. How do you write about violence?
Ooh. I probably don't write very much about the actual violence, I think. My books, I wouldn't describe as graphic. And I guess I'm interested in the before and the after rather than the during. So I can definitely think of, I love leaving things up to the imagination, because I think that's actually far more effective than being very detailed. And I'm probably the biggest scaredy cat in the world. I'm the classic person who's closing their eyes in movies at the violence and all the rest of it. So while it's definitely there, and I know I can think of particularly in my second book, there was one particular part of it that I wrote about what I would be most scared of if it happened to me. And I realized then it's actually what most women would actually fear. So I got a lot of people really enjoyed it, but I knew it was hard. That it was a hard part for women to read, and there was very little violence in it. It was the apprehension of violence that was what was difficult. Yeah.
We sort of covered a little bit of this one. Do you start with plot or character or something else?
Yes. Well, I guess we have. I'm just something else. Once I like for my first novel, All These Perfect Strangers, I actually started with structure. Okay. And so for that, it was, I can even remember I was doing the wash up one day and I was thinking, oh, what am I going to write about with this novel that had been sitting there? And I thought about how crime novels often have that structure of a stranger comes to town and everybody else knows each other. And then the reason it works for crime novels is that the stranger will keep on going to solve the crime no matter the cost. Whereas if you lived in the country town and you knew that you might uncover a murderer, but more people might get murdered, you'd think, well, let's just leave it alone. Whereas a stranger will keep it up to the end. So that's probably the most common crime novel structure there is. And so I thought, what would happen if everyone was a stranger? And so everyone was a stranger coming at the same time to this place. How would that change it? Could a crime novel work with that structure? Because I hadn't read one. And then I thought, well, how could you set that up? How would that work? And then I thought first year uni would be perfect for that, because no one knows each other. You can have people pretending to be someone else. You're just going on first impressions, all the rest of it. So that was how that started. And this most recent one was I had a few different ideas, and they were very different ideas. So one of the ideas, and probably the kind of the wackiest part of it, was I was at the bookshop, and apologies to anyone who came on to the Sisters in Crime event, I'm about to repeat the story, but I'll make it shorter. At my bookshop, someone came in who was a very visual person, and I was really captivated by her strong, the way she saw the world visually, because of course in a bookshop, most of the people you're going to meet are words people like I am. They're really bookish people, but you get people, this smaller sort of subset of people who are obsessed by something. So they'll read all the books about that something. And this was one of those type people. And she was really into fashion. And it turned out one of the things that she was obsessed with was a dress she'd seen 15 years before that turned out to be actually my wedding dress. And it was an amazing coincidence, but it was a lovely moment into how differently we both saw this world, that she was sort of navigating in a visual way and I was navigating it in a words way. And so I thought I'd love to have that in a book where I think all the clues, maybe the vast majority of the clues are visual clues. And you've got someone who's a words person desperately trying to navigate them, really not understanding that world that well and stumbling her way through. So that was the idea.
Yeah, terrific. And our last question for today, how would you get away with murder?
Well, I personally think easily. So it involved some retraining. I'd retrain as a doctor or a nurse, and I'd do it medically. I once very cheekily, I've got a few medic types in my family, and I asked one of them and said, whose job essentially is to save people's lives every day of the week, said, you must sometimes think how easy it is to murder people. What's the easiest way to murder someone? And he had to say to me, well, Aoife, my job actually is to save people's lives. I really don't think that. And so I thought, oh, I really insulted him. I'm so bad. But then he came back 4 years later and said, you know how you asked me that question one day? And I went, yeah. He said, well, I can detail you exactly how I do it and would take 5 minutes. And he said, the reason I can do that is it's happened and it got a lot of publicity. And it was how, I might have this wrong, but do you remember, Karina, and as a journalist, maybe you might remember, Israeli spies broke into a hotel and killed, was it a Hamas leader or someone else in another country? And they literally did it within 3 minutes, killing him. And he was thought of to have a heart attack. It's a particular type of drug that basically freezes everything. And so instantly you're dead. And the only way they caught them is they forgot about the CCTV, and there was CCTV of them coming through the roof and then coming down, and that otherwise the death itself would never have been picked up ever. It was just that, yeah. So that's how I do it.
So you want that drug and you'll come through the roof.
Yeah. Well, I'd check the CCTV because I'd make sure I'd novel that as well. That's the two things.
Aoife, thank you for being with us on Murder Monday.
I've had a blast. Awesome. Take care, Karina.